Душе моя Господа, благословен єси, Господи, благослови, душе моя Господа, і вся внутрення моя, ім'я святое Його.
I'm really sorry I couldn't have been here yesterday as I planned. That's a family illness and complication that prohibited me from coming. Lift it up, okay. So, because I really look forward to this conference every year. It's one of the highlights of my year coming here. I think this is my 6th year, if I'm not mistaken. And it's always a very enjoyable forum, and I always walk away feeling very enthusiastic about church unity and all the work that's going on. Having said that, I know the theme of this year conference is answering the question, sister churches, is it fact or fiction? And I just heard from a friend that so far the presentations I missed were all saying this is fact. Well, I'm not trying to bring everybody down, but the title of my talk today is answering this question is fiction due to the absence of fact, a layperson's experience and perspective. I want to emphasize, though, that and that this will come out as I talk. Where I'm getting that perspective from, and that's really what I want to focus on today is why I have that perspective, where I'm getting it from, what it potentially means for us, and I actually do have optimism that we're going in the right direction despite this. So normally what I do when I present is I put out an agenda slide, which I'll do. I'll talk about what I'm going to talk about. But I want to start off in the next 10 minutes or so telling you a story. And I'll do this from here. Okay. So last year, this conference ended around the same time, and I was out on Facebook. I don't know how many of you are active on Facebook. I'm actually not particularly active in social media. Despite what Father Ron just read, yes, I do work with a lot of organizations that communicate a lot of what they're doing through social media. But when I say I'm not active, I'm not really personally that active. I don't go on and post personally and do a lot of things other than what I do from a ministry perspective. But having said that, I do belong to a couple of groups because I like to see what's going on. And one of the groups I belong to on Facebook is called the Orthodox and Non-Orthodox Christian Discussion Group. So as it turns out, about a week or so, or whatever that date is, I think it says July 5th, 2017, right after I left this conference, I happened to be out there, and I saw this picture. And it was Archbishop Job, who was with us last year, with the Pope Francis. And I was like, wow, that's a pretty cool picture, because I got to know Archbishop Job a little bit last year, and it was just nice to see that. So I read the article, it was really good, and I started looking at the comments. And this is what I want to go through. I want to read you some of these comments, and it sets up a lot of what I'm going to talk about today. So what I expected to see, by the way, when I saw that picture, were positive comments. That's not what I saw. So this is what I encountered. So this one gentleman writes in response to this article and this picture, if you'll forgive my candor, my thoughts generally are that Roman Catholicism behaves towards Orthodoxy like the ex-girlfriend who keeps calling and trying to start another relationship who just can't accept that while you have no ill will towards her, you're just over her and not interested. Another person chimed in, well, that being the case, the greater visible unity of the body of Christ is not exactly something as trivial as an ex-girlfriend. More like an estranged spouse or sibling who you long to mend ties with. Then one person wrote, not holding my breath. This is when I made somewhat of a mistake. I decided to chime in. Which like I said, I almost never do. Probably to my detriment sometimes. So here's what I said. And by the way, Facebook, as you know, archives everything. So you can go back and find everything you said or shouldn't have said. So I said this. Hey, I just spent 4 days with Archbishop Job, the man in the picture with the Pope, at the Orientale Lumen Conference in Washington, D.C., where we were among the speakers. There were also other Catholic and Orthodox clergy who spoke, And we had letters of greeting from Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew and the Vatican. There's been so much more progress between the two churches in the last 50 years than the last 500, but it doesn't seem to be filtering down to the laity. Father Thomas Fitzgerald, an Orthodox priest, gave a great summary of the progress. If anyone's interested, they can order the recording from the OLF website. I pasted the link. And by the way, of all the talks I've heard over the years, Father Thomas Fitzgerald's one, which was Thursday morning of last year, made the most impact on me. And that's why I was like, wow, this is perfect. I'll just let everybody know that's out there. They'll go get the information and they'll change their minds. Naivete, right? So the one guy chimes in. This is promising, but until the Roman pontiff relinquishes his specious claim to authority of all Christendom, it just ain't gonna happen. So we're back. Hi, Sean. It definitely seems to be trending in that direction. I've attached a link to a statement from the Joint International Commission for Theological Dialogue between the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, an agreed upon statement called Synodality and Primacy During the First Millennium Towards a Common Understanding and Service to the Unity of the Church. Read paragraph 19 in particular. The Orthodox and Catholic bishops and theologians in attendance agree that during the first millennium, which should be their guide for moving forward, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, did not exercise canonical authority over the churches of the East. We may have a long way to go, but from an Orthodox perspective, in parentheses, I'm Orthodox, this is a great start. Now, when I think it gets interesting. All of a sudden, this new person joins the discussion. This article is about nothing. The person hasn't read it clearly because I didn't even post it. No news, nothing happened. If anyone boasts of huge steps towards reunification allegedly made in the past 50 years, which somehow did not reach the laity, then I'm sure we'll gladly hear about it. Out with them. Out with it, please. See, these huge steps must have somehow failed to reach the bishops as well. So, I am a fairly measured person. Before I responded, I looked at the little profile picture of the person writing this comment, and I was like, that looks like a priest. So I said, Father, good morning. Your tone seems a bit sarcastic and challenging, but that's the problem with communicating this way as opposed to face-to-face. So forgive me if I'm wrong. Also, you used the word boast in your comment. I was not trying to be boastful in any way, just trying to share what I learned recently, so please forgive that as well. To address your question, I contacted the director of the OLF, I called Jack, and asked him to post the talks from the most recent conference, and in particular the talk that summarized the progress in the last 50 years. Once that's done, I'll send you a link and you can judge for yourself what you think. If he doesn't do it soon, I have the audio CD and can listen to it again and summarize his points and post them. But I would prefer you get to listen to it unfiltered by me. Take care. Response. Dear Mr. Haldas, we miss each other completely. What you call progress is just words. I'll drop the cynicism and say it aloud. Whatever progress Roman Catholics like to think may have been done in the past 50 years or in the past 500 years is naught. Zero. No progress. There cannot be one. The basic positions miss each other. They refuse to understand what reunification would require. I'll boil it down for all of them gladly. Totally foregoing of about a dozen theological evolutions they went through these past 100 years. Total giving up, going back to point zero, as they somehow think there'll be reunification without this. There's absolutely zero progress. They speak different languages. Because they speak different languages, they do not mean the same thing by wanting reunification. Thus, no progress, no audios or CDs can change that, unfortunately, Mr. Haldas. So this time I'm getting pretty depressed, because this is not the world I live in. At least by the attitude of my own heart. I certainly encountered things like this, but this is not indicative of where I'd like to think everybody is. This is somebody that has a flock writing this. I did a little bit dug a little bit deeper to find out who this was, and I think I'm now addressing a bishop. So, I'm trying to be careful. I said bishop, and I said his name, and I won't say his name. This is the only encounter I have with this person, so I don't want to disparage anybody. I don't know this man, except through these going back and forth. I said, Bishop blank, is this your title? I want to address you properly. In any case, please call me Michael. Thank you for the exchange and for your other comments as well. Most of the progress I refer to is that told to me by Orthodox archbishops, metropolitans, and priests, in addition to Catholic clergy. I would be interested in your thoughts on Orthodox clergy who claim progress too and who are part of the dialogue with the Latin and Eastern Catholic clergy. I can't tell how my tone is coming across, but I'm sincerely interested in your thoughts. And I really was, because this was catching me off guard. I didn't expect such a strong, argumentative, combative response. So he said something about what titles we use in the East, but he said, the misunderstanding is greater than I thought. Orthodoxy is not Rome. With her, Rome says what the Pope says. Orthodoxy is a confession of 24 local churches. Even if we consider only those with full autocephaly independence, there are still some 14 local churches. Unless you can claim to have a binding decision of at least one of them as to this matter, you have nothing. I take no offense, nor am I giving one. I'm stating the facts of the system without emotions. Rome also misunderstands our approach, and no matter how many times we reiterate it, Rome simply keeps on ignoring it. We can discuss, negotiate, talk until Christ's second coming, and will happily indulge you, but nothing can come out of it until Rome starts making real steps back, or roll back the previous versions, as software developers say. Rome mistakes our polite discussions with our acceptance of our innovations, countless mistakes. That is the crux of the misunderstanding. I won't read the last one, but he goes on to kind of give me, again, more of a tutorial of Orthodoxy 101 and what changed and what I should be understanding more. So, why do I share that? It's a bit extreme, I admit, but unfortunately, there's a lot of parts of what he shared that I do encounter in my life, in my ministry life, my church life as a layperson, that is not really involved in all these dialogues, but just in doing ministry work on the ground. And this is what I tend to encounter sometimes. And you'll see in a moment that I'm not making a case here that this is an Orthodox position across the board. I'm going to go through things I've encountered on both sides, but this is that type of example is one of the reasons why I still think that there's a narrative out there that's fictitious, that's not what we in this room dialogue and experience. So let me now go. Okay. So this gets into what I wanted to share with you today. I'm going to share some stories and vignettes and experiences, observations. They won't all be that long, but I want to share these with you. And I want to use Father Thomas's talk from last year as a foil, because he went over through so many points. So I want to represent some of those points, and then talk about what I experienced against those points. And I'm going to offer some thoughts to be challenged. You know, one of the things about having a limited perspective is just that, you have a limited perspective. So as I share some of the things I've experienced, I'd be very interested in hearing during the Q&A session your experiences, whether you say, yes, that's what I experienced, or no, your experiences are either not unique, but are not the norm. And then just engage in dialogue. All right. I want to start off and share with you my story. I shared a little bit last year. This is not me being indulgent, longing to stand up in front of people and talk about myself. I really don't want to. But it's germane to the perspective I'm going to share and some of the conclusions I'm going to draw at the end of this talk. Because my journey to where I'm at today was not a straight line. It was kind of rocky, if you will. So that picture, does anybody remember that picture from the children's Bible? Okay. That's on page 362 and 363 of the Golden Crest Children's Bible. This picture is my recollection of my earliest religious experience. Not church, this picture. I remember, I've gone back and looked at what I've written, and I've set up 4, 5, 6, because clearly I don't remember exactly what it was. But I was young, and I remember being in my bedroom, and I opened this picture, the Bible, that's what I came to. And something struck me right away about Jesus. That never left me. You know, one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit I think God has been gracious with me about is I've always felt the presence of Christ somehow, the reality of Christ. no matter what's going on, even when things are terrible, I don't understand sometimes when things are going on, but it never diminishes my sense of Christ's presence. And that it started with that picture. But I really wasn't a church kid. So I was baptized and christened in the Orthodox Church as a 6-month-old. But my family wasn't particularly church-going, so we were the typical churchgoers when there was weddings, christenings, funerals. So I really didn't have the Orthodox Christian experience growing up. And then as I moved towards my teen years, later childhood and teen years, I call them the prodigal years because I was outside of everything, probably doing things I shouldn't, but I still never lost that sense of Christ. So when I got to college, I met a girl, we started dating, and she was Catholic, the Latin Catholic Church. And I started going with her for like 4 years. And it was there that I really first started understanding what liturgical worship's about. What's the value of going to church every week? What's the value of having rituals that you can count on that can help bring you closer to God? But still, I still didn't have the tools to really understand. So then I met the girl that I would eventually marry, who's now converted to Orthodoxy, but she was raised in the evangelical church. I was there for most of my 20s, read the Bible front to back. That was one of the gifts of being in that culture. As you know, they're very big on the Word of God and reading. So I really learned Scripture. I really learned what it means to get Christ into your life. So all of a sudden, this picture now, this experience, I started having tangible things and a much greater understanding of what that meant. And like I said, it was about getting Christ into my life. And then finally, Nikki and I have said this before, I don't know what the right term is, not a convert, kind of a revert back. And a series of circumstances led me to the Orthodox Church, and that's where what continues to this day in my heart and thought which is really the organic sacramental life of the church, that endless growth, that transition from getting Christ into your life to getting into the life of Christ through the sacramental understanding, which we all share in our traditions. So for me, it became very palpable to me through the Orthodox Church, but it's a shared experience, as we know, among Orthodox and Catholics because of the sacramentality and the understanding of our church. So I share that because this frames my perspective on my ecumenical encounters and what I think I see and potentially what I think I'm missing. So again, I want you to take a couple of takeaways from what I've shared with you so far. First, and this is really important, I personally did not experience the church apart from Christ. I didn't experience the church first and then start experiencing who Christ was. It was the opposite. It was the person of Christ that led me to want to seek his church. And I think that's important in terms of perspective and also what me and people that had a similar experience can bring to the ecumenical dialogue. And obviously, my experience in the ecumenical dialogue isn't balanced. I'm Orthodox Christian. I go to an Orthodox parish. I participate in a lot of Orthodox related functions, so I'm naturally going to have a perspective that's not balanced. That doesn't mean my heart's not balanced with my desire for unity, but just my experiences aren't balanced. So you have to take some of that into account as I talk and I share things. I can't see well. All right, so here's my first observation I want to share. My fellow religious educators in my parish, and we quote Hosea 4:6 a lot of time when we're teaching. My people suffer for a lack of knowledge. And again, isn't that, in most issues, isn't that what we all suffer from? We don't necessarily have all the knowledge we need to judge correctly or to navigate through circumstances correctly. We acquire the knowledge. But these particular points from Father Tom's talk last year really struck me, and they struck me in the context of the knowledge he was sharing and the experience I was having in my life that would indicate to me that we have a lack of knowledge based on what he's sharing. For example, he talked about how the leaders and theologians of both churches have gotten together and have affirmed this common understanding of the convictions of our faith. They've spoken of a relationship between the two sister churches. He emphasized how that terminology, sister churches, didn't exist up in the last 500 years. It's a relatively modern phenomenon, if you will. He talked about how there's so much movement out there where we've gone from isolation to engagement, from monologue to dialogue. He said misunderstanding to mutual enrichment. And then he went and listed all these meetings, all these different dialogues, all these different commissions that are working to restore a full communion between the two churches. Now, to me, that was a lot of new information. I don't know if it was to you or not. But the problem I had is when just as a story I shared with you, when I was sharing it within the cultures I was in, none of this was understood. It was either not understood or not accepted as really what's going on. And why is that? Well, he mentioned on his presentation that he said, be careful what you read, be careful of the books you read. He said, for anything before 1950, he said, be careful about reading that when it comes to the dialogue between the two churches. I would modify that a bit, and I say that with humility because I'm not a scholar, and I'm sure he knows more what he's talking about than I do, but I have encountered books written relatively recently that still are perpetuating things that aren't really true in the dialogue. Social media is huge for the perpetuation of misinformation, or in some cases, disinformation. That's why, as hard as it is sometimes to participate in social media, because one of the challenges is how do you combat all the stuff out there that's not, you want to, as Christ condescended to us, we want to condescend to these places and spread the good news, put out good information, but at the same time, you can also be inadvertently perpetuating people not coming physically to church. I mean, there's a balance here of what we have to do. However, there's a lot of stuff out there on social media that just is getting it wrong according to what we're learning here, according to a lot of the good works that the speakers and past speakers are part of, are doing. And I'm reminded, actually, my brain works in kind of a funny way. These disparate thoughts come to my mind that are analogous. But I remember when my child was being born, we were going to the OBGYN, and of course my wife was reading all these books, and then going to the doctor and quoting all these books. And finally he said, throw out the books, and just listen to me. I think we're in that same type of mode a little bit. We have to start being discerning what books and information to throw out and what's good to listen to, because otherwise we're going to continue to have a lot of wrong information perpetuated that is keeping this dialogue from moving in the right direction more than it should. So what are some of the specific things that I encountered? So again, a little unbalanced, but I'm just going to walk through some of these a little bit about what I tend to encounter. So you heard that exchange with me and the bishop. He was not having any of the progress. Now, most of my encounters aren't quite as combative, but just in my conversations, I get progress. What progress? I don't see any progress. So that tends to be, what I think is the average layperson's perspective. 1054, 1204, 1484. What are those dates? Well, as you heard last year, your father Tom said, we can really trace the schism pretty much back to historically to 1484 when it really was full blown. He said, well, I'm like, wow, that's news to me, because I was still under the common quote unquote misunderstanding about the 1054 and the 1204. And when I floated this out to people I've spoken to, these are learned people that read a lot. When I said, 1054, as Father Tom and other books will say, is really the anathema was against persons, not the church. That's not commonly understood. It's still thought of as against churches. In the class I teach at church, and some of the members, some people are here that attend that class, we have a lot of people that are come to that class that, because where we're situated, we're in a very affluent area, we have a lot of very what I'll call worldly accomplished people, high up in government, high up in industry, that will come to the class, not necessarily regularly, but enough. The reason I bring that up is because I saw some of those people, especially high up in government, I saw some of the things I guess it was the anniversary of 1204. Some of the things they were tweeting, or some of the things they were putting out. And it was like, don't forget, we must always remember. But I was like, wait a minute, we want to forget this stuff. This was a sad chapter in the church's history. And I think, Ryan, I think you wrote a very articulate piece, as I recall. Am I getting that right on 1204, or am I thinking of somebody other?
I wrote several, yes, it's been a while ago.
Yeah, there's something that I thought I saw, I read by your name. It was very, laid out things very nicely. So, good job. But most of the stuff I saw there was very much like, let's not forget this conflict. Let's not forget this division that happened, what it means. And I'm like, no, that's not really where we want to be. We want to be mending fences, not reminding people of things that happened. The filioque, I can't tell you how many times that keeps coming up. When I first became part of this group, I think it was 2012, 2013, I remember sitting at Jack's table, we were just talking about things, and I brought that up, and he said, oh no, that's pretty much, the theologians have gotten together and worked that out, that's not really an issue anymore. I'm like, really? Every book I read about the church, it always comes up. But it's still, I remember, again, I'm not going to name names, I remember one person in our class, we were talking about, before the class began, we were talking about unity and division, and his finger went up, the filioque. I'm like, no, it's not quite what you think it is. And then I'll hear again the theological differences all the time. Atonement, penal substitution, the difference between the West and the East, and what it means, the Immaculate Conception will come up. And I remember in 2014 when we made the pilgrimage to see the Pope and the Patriarch, I remember distinctly, we were sailing down the Bosphorus, that's the right river, right? And some of you were there. Metropolitan Callistus was kind of holding court below, while a lot of people were above. And he was enlightening us and educating us on all the issues that were kind of off the table. And I remember he said to the small group that was there, he said, the Immaculate Conception is really, these were his words, more one of dogma versus not dogma, but we're not far off from what we believe. That was not, actually, I remember the group there was like, wow, that didn't really compute because that's not what most of them thought. And of course, we know, he did say the one issue that's left on the table for the most part is the matter of governance, is the matter of authority and how the two churches understand authority. And then lastly, I always hate to bring this up, but this is what I encounter. The words heretical, heretic, are thrown around way too much and too casual. I remember on Easter, I was with some friends. One of the friends I was talking to, really nice, mild-mannered man, not combative, not looking to start fights. But even out of his mouth, he said, isn't some of the differences between us Orthodox and Catholics as they develop some heretical beliefs? Just, he said it casually. I was like, no, that's not, it's a conversation for another time, but I said it's not quite what you think. And we have to be careful of that word. And then I was at a conference, and a very prominent Orthodox priest handed out a handout to everybody listing the heresies of the different churches. Some of them were legitimate, but not necessarily between our two churches, but what I didn't like about it was, again, the casual nature of how this was being perpetuated. It's a serious word, it's a serious charge, it deserves serious, thoughtful, and sensitive discussion, not just casual us and them type of attitude, in my opinion. So, now, what do I tend to get on the Catholic side, my more limited experience? I get, well, join the majority, what's the big deal, right? We're the biggest. We're all the same anyway, aren't we? I hear that a lot. And I'm even fond of saying, look, and we can quibble over differences, but I think we all agree as Christians, the findings of the first two ecumenical councils, the nature of Christ and the nature of God, we agree on. So let's start there with the big thing before we... and then what I found, and again, this is probably a lot of your experience, but I found a lot that Eastern Catholics are very unknown, even among the Latin Catholics, and certainly among the Orthodox. That's a whole new, like, what are Eastern Catholics? Because everybody tends to think, I guess, the Latin Catholic Church as the church, not realizing that, what is there, 20-something other, when you add them all up, there's 20-something other Catholics, something like that, 23. So, and then of course, I always get, we're the true church. That girl I dated in college, I was engaged to her briefly, and I remember her mother said, you must get married in the Catholic Church because we're the true church. I was yelling at her. Sounds plausible, but these are some of the things. And again, a lot of the knowledge that's not seeming getting down to a certain level of people would address so many of these things, I think. Or at least to be a start to the process, because minds and hearts aren't always in unison. So here's another observation I want to share. And I always tend to think scripturally. So I remember I call this the rich man Lazarus effect. Remember when I talked about that there's a great gulf between us, there's a great gulf fixed? Well, I come to a conference like this, read the literature that's going on. And again, it's wonderful, but it just seems to be this gap that is prohibiting getting this information out, where it becomes just as much in the thoughts and hearts of people in parishes as it is in folks in this room. And I think, I really put the iceberg up there because I think we kind of we're touching the surface of a lot of this stuff in terms of reach, but there's still a lot going on that needs to happen. So I want to have an analogy here, and again, this is something I'm throwing out that I hope we have a dialogue about, because this could be wrong. But in my life as a business person, I have a company partner, and what we do is we help private companies bidding on large federal contracts, primarily healthcare contracts, but large federal contracts, and we help them strategize and develop their written proposals to win the business. And one thing I've noticed, and I've been doing this since 1987, so that's back, I guess, towards the end of Reagan's administration. So, think of the presidents between Reagan and now. I've noticed that no matter what president comes in, no matter what sweeping administrative changes they say or actually do, the level I operate at, which is not an insignificant level. Some of these deals that I'm helping companies with can get upwards of billions of dollars, so they're pretty big. Nothing seems to change no matter what. So you have policymakers and leaders getting together and working out all this stuff, but it doesn't seem to change at certain levels within the government. And the reason I say that is because I think it's the same type of, at least I perceive it to be the same type of thing that it's going on in our churches, because how do you roll out change so easily in large, diversified organizations? I put up an implementation report. I don't expect you to read that, but this is standard business, how you implement change. There's top down, there's all kinds of different ways. But I remember this one company I worked for, they had to do a sweeping change of policy about how we kept time in charge of government. So it started at the top, and then it went down. The company was organized at these management levels, group manager, program manager, project manager. And it was an organized rollout over 5 months of doing this. And eventually, it rolled out, the changes were adopted, and within a year's time, they became part now of the new culture of the company. But again, how does that happen amongst two churches with different structures, right? I mean, one could argue that the Catholic Church is better organized if you compare it to a business model in terms of having a top-down based structure, right? You could say that the Pope is the head of the church, and then there's layers. Probably a naive way to put it. But on the Orthodox side, we have all these independent churches. We don't have the same type of understanding of authority and governance. So how then do all of these things that these councils, that these commissions that theologians are agreeing upon, how does it then get filtered to the organizations? And maybe it is. Maybe I'm just not aware of it because of what I see. But again, I throw that out for challenge because my perception is based on my experience, is it's really not filtering down. And I'll offer some more thoughts on that as some reasons. Because maybe it's just a matter of how a lot of change takes place through critical mass, right? You keep going at it until it builds up enough critical mass, and then it becomes part of culture. I mean, look at technology. I mean, the Apple technology that had its roots in something in the early 60s. It didn't really start coming to bear until the early 80s, so it just takes critical mass. Another observation, when I quote this scripture, about friendship, where Christ talked about greater love as laid down life for his friends, and he made the transition. In my favorite part of the Bible, between John 13 and John 17, the Gospel of John, where he transitioned from calling the disciples essentially his students to now his friends. And I thought of that in light of what Father Thomas shared last year, which were that he mentioned that dialogues are necessary, absolutely, but they're not sufficient. And I love what he said. He said we need prayer and common expression of witness. This process cannot take place only at the local level. And he went on to say lay and clergy must share in the prayer of reconciliation, must be attentive to the words of reconciliation, and that we must, I love this, join together in acts of common witness and service to society, because then he pointed out the wounds run deep. So I have a slide here, the head and the heart. Why do I put that, the brain and the heart? Why do I put that up? Because your father, I'm sorry, I just heard a dialogue. Father Thomas Fitzgerald wasn't he the former dean of the seminary? He's a professor at Holy Cross Seminary right now, so I probably should have said more about who he was, not assuming everybody knew him. But I remember, again, I don't like bringing up politics, but just something stuck in my head. I remember the first Gore-Bush debate back in, I guess, '99, where the issue of abortion came up. And George Bush, I don't know if he really believed this or trying to be political. I hope he believed it. But he said something that stuck with me. He said, it's really not a matter of changing minds. It's a matter of changing hearts on the issue. And isn't that true about so much of things in life that are either controversial or divide us? We don't always come to agreement or come to mutual understanding through head knowledge, although we need it. Like Father, it's a matter of when the heart changes, and I think that's what Father Thomas was getting at. He was talking about this has to be in conjunction with prayer and with shared service. I remember in my days before I had my own company, I remember working with a group. We all came from different backgrounds. We all had our notions of how we should do a government proposal. In my world, it's called a proposal process. Everybody has a different variation. So I had about 5 or 6 people on my staff. They all had diverse views, and they were not getting along. And I was trying to lay out, very intellectual, this is the process, with slides, and here's how it works. Making no difference. So I got them in a room, I did the Myers-Briggs, just had a lot of fun, got them to know each other. Spent all day doing it, we had a lot of fun. And then started having lunches together, and guess what? All the talk of the process went away within a month or so. They had gotten to know each other, they had become friends or friendly. So essentially, they solved their problem of division relationally, not informationally. So there's a component of all of this that's based on our ability to develop relationships and solving things relationally, not informationally. And I thought about that because I know in my parish, we're concerned often with what's going on with the parish, just enough to deal with the daily concerns of what's happening in your parish, much less reaching out to other parishes and working with them, developing relationships with them, having the courage to collaborate with parishes outside of your tradition, because in some cases it does take courage because different people have different views. But anyway, I think again, it struck me that we have to have conditions where relationships can develop, for real change to happen, and for all these wonderful things that are being worked out to start taking hold and taking effect, where most people live their faith. Am I doing okay on time? I can't see the clock. Okay. I'm almost near the end. All right, I think this is one of my final observations. Everybody recognizes the classic bell curve, right? Again, scripture pops in my head. When I started thinking about this, I started thinking about Christ in the book of Revelation when he gave very hard-hitting messages to the 7 churches. And I forget the church, was it Macedonia? I forget which one it was, but he basically chastised them. He's like, either love or hate. Don't be lukewarm. I've spit you out of my mouth, right? So let me talk about either extremes of this bell curve, and then I'll get to the lukewarm part. But this is a classic 9%, 81%, 9% distribution. And I would say, and I don't have science behind this, but I would say there's a small group, folks like us, people doing work beyond this, that are very much focused on this issue of church unity and ecumenism. I never say that word, ecumenism. Oriental movement, all these joint dialogues that Father Tom and others have talked about, ecumenicists. There's people out there that are very dedicated to this issue, which is very encouraging. Because I was just reading the scripture readings of the day in our church this morning, and it talked a lot about how much is saved through the remnant. When numbers get small, God always preserves a remnant. So even as our group gets smaller, we have a remnant, right? We should keep up the good work. But there's groups out there. Then, of course, you have the other extreme, and I put in quotes fanatic, because I remember Metropolitan Callistus affectionately saying, there's only one way to deal with fanatics. What's that? He said, ignore them. Should have done that encounter I showed you in the beginning. I was better off. But I also think you get, again, it's maybe a little controversial, I think you get on that side what I call the spirit of religion, where it seems to me at times that there's more fervor and passion and focus for the ways of the church, but not necessarily what the ways of Christ as he wants the church to be. And I'll show a distinction in a minute. But I remember when I was coming back, or when I met the Pope in the patriarch on that pilgrimage, I do a daily quotes of the day ministry, and actually Jack has it on the UC Club's app now. But when I put out the quotes that day, I said, oh, not kind of by the way, but I was very honored to meet Pope Francis. Well, I got an email almost immediately showing, about a page or two long, all the reasons as an Orthodox I should not be on to meet the Pope. Again, it seems like every time I get excited, I get the wind thing. I don't know, say about somebody. Maybe I'm just too soft. But again, I think that because I've come to know a little bit more about that person, I would say that person is seems to be more committed to ways of the church than remembering that John 17:21, that Christ wants us all to be one. So whether we have legitimate differences or not, it's not a reason not to work in the spirit of love and unity or try. It's not a spirit of compromise necessarily. And then, despite everything I've shared, it seems to me that for the most part, our biggest enemy is apathy, by far, even though I've dwelt on some of the other things. And that most people, this issue just isn't as prevalent with them, if it's even on their radar screen, as something that's important. Despite what I've shared so far, most of the time when I talk about some of these things, I get a polite nod, a smile, I'm listening to you, but I can tell you just don't care about the issue. And that's something, again, how do you change it? I don't have all the answers. I think we keep doing what we're doing. I want to share this final story, and I'll conclude. Our director of religious education at the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, his name is Reverend Father Dr. Tony Anton Rain. He became ordained a year or so ago. He was a lay person for years, but he still affectionately goes by Father Tony. So he told a story that made an impact on me. And I said I'd like to repeat the story in the podcast, various mediums I work, and he said, sure, but I want you to tell it exactly how I have it. So I've always done it. So let me just briefly read to you what he did. So what the backdrop of this is he still teaches at the seminary. So he had a class of seminarians, and he always likes to ask his audience, what makes them Orthodox? So he asked his seminary class at Holy Cross to write a short paper in which the student had to name 5 things that make them Orthodox. Hands shot up. What do you mean? They responded, all of you are Orthodox, right? The student said yes. So Father Tony asked, so what is it that makes you Orthodox? Write it down. Tell me what they are in 2 pages. For a few days, students would come to his office saying, is this what you want? Father Tony's response was, does this make you Orthodox? The student would say yes, and Father Tony would respond, then go with it. When the paper was due, Father Tony said, it's only fair I give you my list, but as a teacher, I'm not going to give you 5 things, but 7. But number 1, what makes us Orthodox is we believe in Jesus Christ. We're Christians. The students all groaned, oh no. Father Tony responded, yes, most of you had things like liturgy, sacraments, fasting, the councils, the canons. All of that is certainly part of being Orthodox, but all of you, personally, neglected that we are first and foremost followers of Jesus Christ. Our Orthodox Christianity tells us who Jesus Christ is through the councils and all the rest, but it's all about Christ. So I'm ending kind of where I began. I think one of the keys to any expression we have is to remember it is all about Christ. And Christ wants unity, not division. So as we keep in mind what Christ wants, despite any prejudices or experiences, or whatever we have to know that that's not the work he wants us to do. He wants us to work towards unity. So a couple of conclusions, and then I'll stop. So here are my conclusions. Yeah, there's been great progress made, tremendous progress, more than I even know of, but more needs to be made. We know our obstacles are lack of knowledge, but probably more so lack of desire. And we have the dynamics of organizational change, large organizations that are fragmented or distributed models. It's hard to make change. Change comes slow, and maybe it should come slow because we've had years of being apart, so maybe it's appropriate. Just what I talked about. Sometimes there's greater commitment to rightness of my church than to Christ himself. What's he want? I just quoted John 17:21. Maybe all of you want. John 14:34. Love one another as I have loved you. And finally, I am on a very optimistic note, because this is kind of where I really am, is my friends always remind me, especially in times of trouble, that God's got this. Last 50 years are probably a taste of what's to come. God's hand is clearly at work. I'm reminded of a couple of things. Bob Dylan's song, Keep On Keeping On. Yeah. Maybe that's all we got to do. Just keep doing these things. Because as Mother Teresa said, God doesn't call us to be successful. He calls us to be faithful. The success is his. So what do? We just have to keep up these dialogues, keep up this good work. I remind myself all the time, it's not always about numbers, it's not always about size. It's about continuing to do the work that we should do, and then God will take care of the rest. The last 50 years are a testament to all the progress that's been made, and there's certainly a lot more progress that's going to be made. So I end on an encouraging note that we just need to keep up the good work. And now I'll be happy to take a break. And I guess we'll move into, after the break, we'll move into the Q&A part of this. Thank you very much.
Благослови, душе моя Господа, і вся внутрішня моя, ім'я свято